Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time joining us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome Myrna Marofsky, author of To the Last Dance. Myrna is a family caregiver and a caregiving advocate. Welcome, Myrna. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Let's start off, Myrna, with a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, I started out as an elementary ed teacher way back when, and I had to quit when I got pregnant. So I became unbelievably an entrepreneur in a lot of different businesses because I was very bored a lot, and I didn't really enjoy being home and not having something to do. So as a result of that, I entered the business world. And today I work as a consultant for the Women Presidents Organization, facilitating groups of women business owners. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years. Larry and I met in high school, which is sort of unbelievable right now when I look at my grandsons. And we were married for 51 years. He was a real estate attorney, very simple guy, very modest practice, but very much loving what he did. And people really liked the services that he offered. We had a really good life. And we have three grandsons, 2 daughters, and they're the love of our life. And we're the love of Larry's life. But after before he was turning 70, he was diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's. And at that point, we were totally not prepared. Our dreams of growing old together had radically changed suddenly. And so we had a very different life that we were set out for as a result of his diagnosis.
When he was diagnosed, what was it a surprise to you? How did you react, and how did Larry react?
You know, that's a really good question, because I don't think anybody's really surprised. You sort of ignore it, try to cover up. I call it the cover up. So you make excuses. Larry was depressed. I thought, whatever. But then it got to be a situation where we had to take it seriously. He had a law practice. You can't risk that. And life was, he kept doing all the things you read about, asking questions. And he himself knew that something was going on. And once we got the diagnosis, he retired immediately, closed his office. And actually, to be honest with you, being retired and not having the attorney at law title after his name was almost a bigger hit at that time than getting the diagnosis. But everybody knows. I don't think you can be surprised. I think you can be you can be in denial. Right. Can't be surprised.
What were some of the signs, other than like the depression and things? What did you notice at first, or did maybe partners at his firm or your children?
Well, I noticed it when he kept coming back after shopping with a list and bringing ketchup. We had so much ketchup that was ridiculous. And it was never on his list. So that was a really big sign. And then this man he had a photogenic mind. He went through law school reading the cases once, and now he couldn't remember things. He'd ask questions a lot, and he just wasn't the problem solver that he had been known for. And I don't think his clients knew, but I think that there was something about it that he knew that he couldn't, something was wrong. My kids notice some of it. But, there were a couple of friends who really took the risk and said, hey, something's going on. What is it? And I value those friendships so much today, because that's not an easy thing to tell a spouse, or to even raise about a friend. But
Right.
it is a gift that you give a friend when you do that, because sometimes we just don't want to face these hard decisions.
Yeah. So you were not in the healthcare field. You were not a caregiver. You probably, like most families, wasn't something you really planned or prepared for, like you said. What took you from writing, you're an author of two prior books, but those are business books. What had taken you or propelled you to decide, I want to write this memoir about To the Last Dance?
Well, first of all, COVID, if you remember COVID, we were all locked. I was locked in this room. And it was just after Larry died. He went through dementia. We went through dementia for 5 years. He had many complications. And it was COVID. And I started revisiting what we had done over the 5 years. And some of the comments that people had made about, wow, how did you do that? Or you're amazing. I wasn't amazing. I just had made a commitment that we were not going to allow dementia to take over our lives, that we were going to still have a meaningful life. And so when COVID hit, I started going through all notes and journals, and I wrote draft after draft, thinking that COVID's going to end pretty soon and I'll get back to my real work. Well, as we all know, that didn't exactly happen. And last year, this book, To the Last Dance, A Partner's Story of Living and Loving Through Dementia, was published. And really, it's about daring to live and daring to love through something that could be such a heartbreak. And how do you overcome the total heartbreak when all that you hear around you is how things are going to be bad, what you're going to lose? I have a lot to say about that, because that's kind of where I'm working to change the conversation around dementia, because we have made it into a tragedy by the kinds of talk that we do. I call it tragedy talk. That's all we heard when we first got the diagnosis. And I was determined to change that and develop a strategy that could help us live meaningful through this, and that I could keep my own identity and the relationships that were important to me. So I just wrote, and people said, oh my gosh, this is, wow, this is going to help a lot of people. And I realized this was really a gift I wanted to give to care partners. My initial thought, being the businesswoman that I am, is that I would sell it in bulk to clinics and doctors and social work agencies and training facilities, that this would be, they buy 30 and they'd say, oh, I have something in my bottom drawer I'll give you, to couples that they face, to the rabbis, to the clergy. Instead of those pamphlets that they give you with pictures of old people with walkers and struggling. And, we were young, we still had a lot of life in us. Right. And so, the book has sold sometimes in quantities, but mostly it's individuals who have really said thank you.
Yeah. And I can imagine, some families are private. Some people don't want to put that out there. Was that ever a challenge for you? Did you ever have a difficult time determining what I should or shouldn't, or did you not hold back at all?
That's such a good question too, because the first drafts, they were like, I created a stage play with acts and different scenes, and I described the characters, and it was like really a theater piece. It's almost a script. Yeah. And I threw that out. Then I wrote like a teacher, because that's what I am. And so I had discussion questions, threw that out. Remember, COVID went for a really long time.
Yes, it did.
And so it's really funny when I go back to some of my drafts. And then finally, I don't know if it was just being with myself or what, I just said, oh, I just have to open my heart here. And if you know me, I don't know how to do much different than that. Yeah. And so I just put it out there. And really, I have to say that people have said, wow, you said things I didn't have the courage to say. And that makes me feel really good about that, because we as care partners, we carry so much. And, it's all about the other person usually and how we are going to take care of them. Well, what about me? Okay. I have a life too. So
Let me ask real briefly, because this is a beautiful cover, and we're going to have the image up here on the screen for the viewers. And if this is, if you're listening to this and you're not able to watch this video, I recommend you come to the YouTube channel to check this out, or go to Amazon and pick up a copy of the book. We have a copy here, and I did not get to read the entire thing, Myrna, but the parts that I have read through it, I mean, you really open up your home and your life to the reader, and I think you make it very personable. But I wanted to ask you about the cover of the book. It's not a traditional cover when I think of a book about dementia or a healthcare style book or a caregiving book. It's very elegant. How did you decide on the cover of your book?
Well, I knew that I didn't want a typical cover. I wanted something that would express the personal side, the emotional side. And to be honest with you, I wrote a love story, and that shocked me. And so I found this lovely artist. Her name is Su Yao Tan. She lives in the Minneapolis area, and she's known for her watercolors. And watercolor seemed the right medium because this is all about fading, things washing away. And so we chose the color red for the love and the dark grays and blacks for the loss, as a metaphor for that love and loss can coexist. And then we have the image of the male fading off the page, and that's obvious. And the woman, I wish I was as thin as that woman, but that woman holding on and pulling back, because that's what couples are dealing with. And that's what I was dealing with. How do I hang on to the love that of my life and still take care of him and then have me at the end? How am I going to be at the end? And the title is very significant. It's very meaningful to The Last Dance. So the two references that Larry and I got to a very sweet last dance in our hallway just days before he died. And I believe that that was his gift of gratitude, that I had done what I had done to get us to that dance. And then the subtitle is very significant too, because it has the word through in it, partner's story of living lovingly through dementia. And through is, you got to get through it, and you want to get through it so you have no regrets. And many of us live with dementia around us or with dementia in our families, but it's how you get through it that this book is about. And that's really what the message I wanted to convey. So the cover is very meaningful to me, and people have really, they like hearing about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And, I've read the title many times and, the subtitle, but to have it explained in that way, it really resonates fully in that, in the example or the explanation that you gave. I want to talk a little bit about your strategy, because, I think people, they talk about a plan, they talk about a journey, they talk about all these different metaphors and, little sound bites for how they're going to, care through with their caregive for their loved one. But you really talk about a strategy for living through dementia. And like I said, it's not a word we usually associate with caregiving.
Right. Right. You usually hear the journey. The journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or,
well, I have a thing about the word journey. And, when I was writing, I have this wonderful tool that I use, and I kept putting in, there were words that I kept checking. Other words for journey, path, whatever, because it's such an overused word. And then the other word was challenge.
Mm-hmm.
How many words come up? There's not very many. But anyways, related to the strategy, I work with business people, and I do a lot of strategy work. And when you do a strategy work, you say, okay, what's the current state? Where are you now? Where do you want to be? What's your future state? How do you envision it? And then what's the gap in between? And with that gap, you figure out a strategy to get to where you want to go. For us, we had a diagnosis of dementia. We heard it was going to be a tragedy. We heard from the doctors that we were going to lose, we were going to lose, we were going to lose. And in fact, the American Medical Journal has said that the tragedy discourse around dementia actually makes it worse than the pathology itself. And there's a really great article about that I quote in the book. So I knew that we had this situation. I also knew that wasn't going to be my life. And Larry was not an average person, and we were not going to make this a tragedy. And I also knew on the other end, that I was going to make the best. I was not going to let dementia rob me of everything. I couldn't let the bad news become a bad life. We had to have meaning. We had to keep our loving relationship. We loved being together, and we loved each other, and we loved our family, and we loved our life. I knew we would be losing. I knew there would be things we'd never be able to do again. But it was that strategy of how was I going to make it the best I could make it under the circumstance. And to do that strategy, I came up with 2 questions that became my guideposts. And one of the questions was, how do I want to live every day? And the second question was, how do I want to feel in the end? Because I wanted no regrets. And those 2 questions were my strategy. And that was what I based a lot of my principles on, of how I was going to live with Larry and how we were going to spend the time we had together. Sadly, Larry had many complications to dementia that a lot of people don't deal with. So I always say a disclaimer, this is my story. It's not, every dementia story is different. But what I hope people get from my story is some hope about possibilities that you can put meaning in your life. So my strategy has become a new term. I didn't know that at the time, but whatever, while I was writing, it sort of appeared. And I realized that caregiving wasn't the term I wanted to use. I wanted to use the term care living. And there's a big difference in that. Caregiving, as you know, is heavy. Care living has some hope in it.
Right. I like that. Maybe you've coined a new term there for everyone, because I think too many times people, they get that diagnosis, and quite often that's all they're getting is that diagnosis. They jump on the internet, or, they had a friend, or, whatever the case may be, who had a really negative experience. And so that person just assumes now their experience will be negative, or, there's no positives once you get that diagnosis. And that person's still here, just like with Larry, and, you had those dances, and they're still a person. They still deserve that dignity, and they still need that support.
Right. Exactly.
During COVID, we were all isolated primarily from our friends, our family, from our churches, our synagogues, wherever. How was that for you and Larry?
Well, he wasn't alive during COVID. He died just months before.
Okay, I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was sitting here with COVID. I think people going through dementia during COVID, it would have been very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, and I just, I think about these families who had a loved one in a nursing home or in a hospital, and they can't get to them under any circumstance, and they don't get to see their grandchildren or their sons or their daughters, and in a lot of cases, even their spouses. But you tell your story, like I mentioned earlier, very candidly, and in some cases, you don't hold back at all about how you feel about some of the professionals that you had dealt with. And I think every viewer, listener, myself, we can understand that fully, because I think healthcare's lost some of that personable approach, that time, even, I dare say, some compassion in some cases. But we also need professionals when we're going through life-changing experiences. What do you have to say about that? And how do you see that changing? And what was that experience like for you and Larry?
Well, I referenced a little bit the tragedy talk, and that started from the very first meeting that we had. After the diagnosis, we were called to a team meeting with the memory team, and my whole family was there. And the doctor started talking as if he was reading from an owner's manual for dementia. And he, went down the whole list, the average age, the stages, you'll lose, you'll need care, get on a list. And Larry's sitting right here. He
He's
became a
not even there. Yeah, like he's not even in the room.
right. He was a specimen for dementia. And my kids they didn't get any guidance. And, they had never thought about this. And we never thought about death. That was just not even in the picture at that time. So we walked out of there really with no guidance, no acknowledgement that there could be a relationship that could continue, or no acknowledgement of who we were, because they never asked. They never asked who we were. So, that was like, I'm not going down this road. I'm not. Another example is when Larry had a terrible, I don't know if people know about Guillain-Barré syndrome, but on top of everything, he got this and he was totally paralyzed. And I don't want to go down that story because it's not an easy one to tell. But
Sure.
as a result of that Guillain-Barré, he had rehab, lots of PT. And people would say to me, you got to get him on a list for a facility because he just can't learn this. And even if he can do it one day, he'll never be able to do it another day. And there were just all this, tragedy. This is a crisis. This is a trauma. Well, Larry did all the PT and he recovered totally from that, and went on, and we went on trips after that, and he walked just fine. But they were scaring me. Everybody was, I have this experience with my mother, my grandmother, my, whatever. And they had no recognition of what it's like to be the wife who is on the other side of this disease. And we carry the big burden too, so the PT people let me down. I'll give you another example where the social worker, we went to, I was trying really hard to find a therapist. And I went to one social worker that was recommended from the memory clinic. And the first thing she said to me was her payment schedule and how I could pay her, which is okay. And the next thing out of her mouth was, well, you need to get him on a list right now. Now, this is just 1 year after the diagnosis. You need to get him on a list right now for a facility because the waiting lists are long. Yes, they are. And then you need to sell your house and move really close to that facility so you can visit him every day. She didn't ask anything about us. She didn't know anything. There was no empathy, no compassion. And needless to say, I didn't continue seeing her. But that was pretty typical of what goes on. So the medical community did not know how much they disappointed me. But I would like to share a story from my book. Can I read from my book? Is that okay?
Absolutely, Myrna.
Okay.
And I hope you sent that social worker a copy of your book too.
Yeah. I think there's a better way to advise people about options. Yes. So let me just get to the page here. Okay. So this is a beautiful story, and it is one doctor that changed my life. Unfortunately, it was a little too late. So here we go. It was only when Larry was at the worst and I had come to the end of my 5-year mission to understand Larry's unusual constellation of diagnoses that I finally found a remarkable doctor who put things in perspective for me. The final appointment ended my search to find answers. All it took was a soft-spoken, empathetic neurologist to say, Larry has such a complex situation, it should be written in an article in a medical journal. Oddly, that felt reassuring. Doctor, I asked, what are the chances of someone getting this diagnosis? He turned to the computer, did a few calculations, and swung around to look at us. 1 in 80,000 cases.
Wow.
Taken aback by this statement, I turned to Larry and I said with irony, "Lucky us." Then, in his most compassionate manner, the doctor spoke the words I needed to hear. "Yes, but think of the 80,000 things you're grateful for over your lifetime." Beautiful. As we got up to leave the room, his parting words for me were, "Take care and be kind to yourself." Oh, how I wish I would have received this message in the beginning. So that's what I was looking for, and I only got it at the end. So, yeah, that was I love that guy. I wrote lots of letters
Yeah.
Commending him for that.
Did he have a chance to get a copy of your book?
I think they all did. In fact, there's a wonderful program here called Partners in Dementia, and it's partners, medical students going into gerontology with couples who have dementia for a year or more. And I was able to speak to all of them. And this doctor invited me to be there and speak to them. And that was really one of the highlights of the last year.
That's terrific. We've interviewed a lot of medical professionals who are all pro advocates, pro raising awareness for dementia. One of them is Dr. James Vickers. He's the head of the Wicking Institute for Dementia and Research Center in Australia. And he was also the head of the medical school, and they're just doing cutting edge, revolutionary, even though it shouldn't be cutting edge, it shouldn't be revolutionary work with these medical students and helping to educate the world on interacting, caring for, and understanding dementia. And
I've heard that Australia is really doing some breakthrough things.
They really are. And I recommend anybody wanting to take some free online courses from the comfort of your home. The Wicking Institute offers that, and they're remarkable. But they've also, for people who are wanting a deeper, higher level education in it, they have a bachelor's program and a master's program as well in dementia. None of the universities or colleges here in the States are doing that, but I think it's something that should be adapted or adopted.
Right. There's a whole different way to look at this. I was fortunate enough, against my better judgment, actually, to go to a session with Dr. G. Allen Power, and he talks a lot about dementia being a human rights issue. And really, there's a few people out there saying the right things. And there's not a lot of people, to be honest with you, talking to the spouses.
Right.
And I think that was something I couldn't find. And so I just wrote it.
Wonderful. I want to ask about the spouses. So we'll talk about you. As you were writing this, I had imagined it could be somewhat therapeutic for you, and also kind of some self-discovery. What did you learn about yourself, Myrna, that maybe surprised you or that you didn't expect as you decided to sit down and write the book?
Oh, I learned a lot. I have to reveal it now. So one of the things I learned was that I wasn't superwoman and a super mom. I thought I could do it all, and I didn't turn to Google to see what to do. I just was going to figure this all out. Well, there's a lot of very complicated things that went on and happened. And I learned, the biggest thing I learned was how to ask for help, not because my biggest fear, actually I have two big fears. One is that I will ever look pathetic. And two, that I would be a burden on my daughters and their families. And so, I was superwoman. I was going to do it all. I was taking the kids, taking Larry, it was just too much. And so I had to really learn how to ask for help when I needed it. And then my daughters are very directors, just like me. They're very much like me. And somebody once told us, we have a lot of directors in our family, which we do. And so I had to learn to be able to respect them and ask them for help in ways that they could help me and feel really good about it, But the other thing I learned was that it wasn't all about me, that these girls, my daughters, needed time with their father, and that they couldn't just walk in the house and I give them a list of things to do, that they came to be with him. So I had to learn to back off. I had to learn to use resources. And it was okay to ask for help, but I had to remember to say please, and I had to remember to say thank you. And I had to remember that just because everything I want done immediately isn't going to be done immediately. The other thing I learned was that I could actually do this. I really didn't think I could. I'm not a care person. I just, if the kids had a sore, they went to Larry. If they hurt themselves, he put the bandages on. And so I had to do some things I never believed I could do, and I did. And I did it with dignity and respect for a man who was very modest and who was very independent. The biggest thing I learned was that Larry was my beloved. And that's a big part. There's a wonderful piece in the book about how I learned that. My therapist kept referring to Larry as my beloved, and I felt like I was hearing a Hallmark phrase. It didn't resonate with me. And then we went through a very, very difficult conversation with her and with him. And I realized that I really feared losing him, and that in fact he was my beloved, and that this was just a different kind of love that we had, and I was going to hang in there. So it was very revealing about who I am. And yes, people keep saying, oh, it must have been very therapeutic to write this, and I think maybe the first couple of drafts were, but as I kept writing, I kept thinking, how could this be something that could help somebody else? Right. What could they learn from it? And even though, like I said, this is my story, everybody's different, I think there are some pearls in it.
Oh, absolutely. I know. I just want to, Tia Newcomer, the CEO of the nonprofit Caring Bridge, she said it's starkly honest and beautifully loving. And then G. Allen Power, medical doctor, he says it's unblinking, deeply insightful, and revealing. And I think you've accomplished that. I wanted to ask you, with your daughters, I'm assuming, because I'm just thinking about, like, with my kids, they may not know everything until they're older, and there may be stuff they never know, like little tidbits and, nuggets or pearls of wisdom, or, part of the love story, if you will. Did they learn things about you and their dad by reading the book that they didn't know prior?
Oh, I think they did. We just did a workshop where I did the keynote, and then they did the the breakout on what it was like for a family. And I took the audience and I just listened to them because it was really interesting for them to talk about. One of the things they shared was how they had to help me understand that they were going through this themselves in their own way, that they were experiencing a loss different, and that I had to let them do that. They also, there's a story in the book about Eve, my younger daughter, who said at one time, I've already lost my dad. I don't want to lose you. So they became very conscious of taking care of, making sure I took care of myself. They don't take care of me, that I took care of myself. Right. Another comment that they made was, all we do is talk about logistics. I want my mommy. And I said, I want to be your mommy too. So then we all had to figure out how to make that happen. But I think they did learn a lot. And there's some things that they wish they never had learned, to be honest with you. And they talk about that. One of the chapters at the end of the book, after the whole story and Larry passes away, I talk about a conversation that the girls and I had around the table this was after he died. And the conversation was so forgiving and so informative. And I think it's one of the best chapters in the book, actually.
I don't know, how old are your grandchildren?
19 and twins that are going to be 16, all boys.
Wonderful. Did have either of them read the book yet?
They've heard a lot about it, but they haven't read it. They all have copies, autographed copies.
Oh.
Um,
Our
but
copy
they're-
was an autograph, Myrna.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I can take care of that.
All right.
I thought I sent you an autograph cap. I apologize.
That's okay.
Yeah, but they, they were there all the time. And the sad part, to be honest with you, is they only remember Larry with dementia. They don't remember a lot. But we keep talking about him. And there's some wonderful events where he was able to share who he was with them. There's a story about his coin collection, and the boys were probably 13, maybe, no, they were probably 12. And they got engaged with his coin collection, and he was so proud of that coin collection that he could share it with them. And then it ended up, we went to a rare coin shop, and they turned in silver dollars and made money off of that. And they were delighted, but he was more delighted watching them. And so there was still some interactions that we always had. That was something that was really important to me, was to keep that relationship until we couldn't anymore. But they never walked out of the house that they didn't give him a hug and say, "I love you." And even when he couldn't respond, they always did that. So, they talk about him now. We make sure that Larry's still in our hearts and in our minds.
Very present. Yeah.
I talk about, in the book, I talk about our tradition of Shabbat dinners. In Judaism, on Friday nights, we celebrate Shabbat. We welcome the new week. And our families had this tradition for years and years and years. Everybody gathers at 5:30. We have a dinner, and we sit around the table, and we have a beautiful meal, but we say these blessings. And at one point, Nathan had been doing something in school, and he suggested that we do that around the table on a Friday night. And so it was, what's one good thing that happened this week, and what was one thing you learned? And so Nathan would start it, and then we go around the table, and Larry would participate in that. And we always knew what he was going to answer. "Larry, what was one good thing that happened this week?" And then he'd turn to me and he'd say, "You." And then we'd say, "What was one thing you learned this week?" And he would say, "I love my family." And we didn't even when he couldn't talk, which was the last 2 years of his diagnosis or his disease, we knew what he was saying when we went around the table. And that was started by my grandson.
That's wonderful. Great memories. I want to just go back for a minute, back to healthcare professionals. You recently had an essay published in Next Avenue, which is a subsidiary of PBS, and it's titled "Let's Change the Conversation Around Dementia." Share with our viewers and listeners what's the essence of that article and why it's something you feel so strongly about.
Thank you for allowing me to talk about that. That article has gotten some really great feedback. So I talk about the tragedy talk and how we have made dementia a crisis by the way we talk about it, by the words we use. The words are powerful. And when you hear a doctor, as I described at a meeting, only go down the negatives, what you're going to lose, you're hopeless and you feel defeated. And so that tragedy talk causes you to go into a survival mode. And instead of giving all you can to the disease to make it meaningful in your lives, you give in, and then you feel powerless. And one of the big things for me all my life is to empower women. And so I'm very conscious of those words that take power away. And so that's where the whole notion of changing from caregiving to care living came about, because caregiving is a job. Care living is a choice, and it's a choice you can do together. And so using words like, we always hear, we not always, but we often hear, "He can't," or it can't be done. And so what I tried to do was say, under what conditions could it happen? what could we do to make this possible? Let's try it. And so just changing the perspective and the words we use can give you a sense of hope instead of defeat. Because how would it be to go through your life 5 years of defeat? Sure, there are hard times. Absolutely. I'm not naive. It was a lot of tough stuff. But if you could just, like I say now, if you could find those ta-da moments and add those along with your long to-do list, life would have some hope to it, some brightness. So that's what it is. There is actually a term that's used in the UK. It's called dementiaism. Perhaps you have heard it. And that is a term that they use to describe how we have made people with dementia feel less than, and that everything that you see is about them is about dementia instead of who they are or who they were or who they can still be. And I used to say, when I used to talk about this, that even if you went to a doctor and they saw dementia on your list of illnesses, that's the first thing that they look for or they attribute to. And I have terrible stories about that in the book, which I don't want to share right now. But I used to say even an ingrown toenail could be attributed to dementia if people aren't conscious of what they're doing. And so it's prevalent. I mean, people sit right next to Larry and look right over him, that he's not there. That's dementiaism. If you start looking at things and what he can't do, then you really are a victim to the disease. And that wasn't going to be for me.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's almost like,
I'll just give you another example. My knee blew out because I was helping transport Larry, and it was just hurting my body so much. So I went to PT, and they treat you. They give you more things to do, to add to your to-do list, 20 reps of this. But what they never did was teach me how to transport Larry so it didn't hurt my knee.
exactly.
And so I had to use YouTube to figure it out. Now, isn't that something that just seems so obvious that you could help the care partners?
In this day and age, there needs to be more support for the person with dementia, so they don't have that, dementiaism, but also for the people and the family around that person trying to help support them. That is something we talk about all the time here.
Right.
And with the families that we encounter, professionally with our business, we just did a dementia conference on Saturday where, it's a year-long series. It's once a month, and we have a book for each topic of that day. And this past Saturday was the Dementia Toolbox. And that's personally one of my favorite that I like to do, because we bring in, 8 to 10 boxes of all these different pieces of equipment. It could be something as simple as a little stuffed monkey that, makes a little noise and it jumps and it laughs. That's good if the person's feeling down or depressed. But then we have other more practical things like a Lazy Susan swivel that you can put on a chair or on a wheelchair, so that, if you are trying to transfer your loved one, instead of having to use, that lower back and your knees get, injured or whatever, it will swivel them on its own, but my point in that, Myrna, is exactly what you're saying. All these people are coming to these seminars and conferences because they're not getting this information from their healthcare providers. And there's just something seriously flawed with that.
Right.
And I don't know how that changes.
Well, I don't either, but I did a whole talk once about how we need to tell our stories. And, was I too honest? Was I vulnerable? Yeah, probably not too honest, but I did it. But if we don't tell our stories, but the stories have to be told in a way that aren't pity parties, right, just the sad stories. And so, I think, I hope that what you're doing sounds fabulous. I hope there are more people doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
I was asked to do a podcast with a young woman whose father experienced dementia, and we were kind of thinking it would be really great. And then she sort of went off with all the new drugs that are out there, all the new things that are out there, which is fine. And I think it's fascinating. And that was really important. But I said to her, I don't think I can work with you on this because my bent is how do you live through it, not what's coming. I can't, that's great. And this morning I kind of was thinking about that. And I thought, she's a daughter and probably pretty worried about this going through her in, genetics. And so that's really important for her. And that's great. But who's talking about just living through this and having really good days, good moments. I call them scrapbook moments in my book. And a scrapbook moment is an instant. It's a moment of joy where you can hold on to it and feel really good about what just happened. Instead of, we're not making big memories anymore. We're making scrapbook moments. And when you put all those scrapbook moments together, you have great memories.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. You do a lot of public speaking now. You've done a lot of, I'm assuming, interviews like this. What is some of the feedback or comments that you've received that have really, really meant the most to you? And I know they're all important. They all mean something. But are there any singular, or maybe there's a few that you said, wow, I'm so glad I did this and it is helping and it is making a difference?
Well, I get a lot of comments of thank you, which just, I love it. I get comments from young women who say, oh, now I get why my mom was fighting me. She wasn't really fighting me. She was trying to hold on. I've gotten comments of, you said things that I couldn't say. And so thank you. A lot of it is appreciation. And then I get some goofy ones, like a friend of mine who I thought, oh, she'll love this book just because it's me. I wrote it. Why not? And she said, oh, your book is really good. It's about relationships, isn't it? And I said, Barb, you got it. It is. It's about relationships and keeping relationships. And she said, yeah, but if you don't have a good relationship with your husband and you want him to die, you're not going to read your book. And I thought, please do not read my book. Yes. So sometimes you get goofy things like that. But in most cases, it's like, wow, I never thought of that. And some woman said I bought one for every member of my family so that they'll understand what I'm going through with my husband. And another guy who is really, he knew Larry very well. And now his wife is going through it and he couldn't wait to get the book. And then he told me very shyly, with, very tentative, I couldn't read it all. I had to just pick it up and read little pieces of it. It was too hard to read the whole thing. And, that's what I was wondering. Why would people read this book? They know how it ends. Larry dies. And I don't mean to go light on that, but that's the end. But they have found things along the way that speak to them. The honesty about hospice, making the decision to get hospice, and what that feels like emotionally to sign off on that. We don't talk about that. That's not an easy decision.
Right. What, just want to wrap up here with a couple more questions. And again, thank you so much for, sharing your time and you and Larry's story. I think it's remarkable. And your advocacy is, I'm just in awe of it, Myrna, and have all the respect for you in the world. One of the things that we're really big on is people don't know what they don't know. And that is a big trap that people walk into, and it's not even intentionally. What is some things that you discovered that you think people don't know that they don't know it yet, that they should know?
This is my favorite.
Yeah, that's why I saved it towards the end.
First of all, thank you for all that you're doing in advocacy and doing this podcast. I know that people are watching it and listening to it, and it is making a difference. We all have to be doing this, and I'm honored to be part of this. It's a very distinguished program. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. Let's start with the social worker, another social worker. She didn't know what she didn't know. And I'm known for aha moments. That's how I train. That's how I teach. And that's what I do for a living is, aha, oh, I didn't think of that. So the social worker came after Larry died, sat on the couch with me to see how I was doing. And I took that opportunity to give her some some constructive feedback. And I said, Laura, you know how many times you asked me if I would get a lift chair and bring it in? And she looked at me and she said, yeah, I asked you many times and you said no. And I said, you're right. I said no. And I said, do you want to know why I said no? And she looked at me quizzically and I said, okay, here's why. Because if I would have brought in that lift chair, Larry would have been sitting over there in the corner and I couldn't hold his hand or put my head on his shoulder anymore. So I had to wait till it was really the only thing we could do to bring that lift chair in. And she looked at me and she had never thought about what that impact was. And how she was presenting it. You need a lift chair, Well, there's more behind that than you think about. My other story just happened a few weeks ago where I spoke with the Minnesota chapter of elder law attorneys. And I told them about coming into the office to our financial planner. And we were coming in to sign some papers. It was supposed to be just a quick, come on in, sign the papers. So we get in the big office building, walk down the hallway. First thing is Larry needs to go to the bathroom. Every time he saw a restroom, he made a dash. So he went to the bathroom and now just know I'm waiting. I'm going for an appointment to sign papers. He goes in the bathroom. He's not coming out, not coming out, not coming out. I get nervous. A guy walks by. I say, would you, my husband's been in there a long time. Can you just see? And he goes in and he comes out and no comment. So after a while, there was nothing more to do. And I just went in that bathroom, the men's room, and I broke down the door and I kicked that door in so fast, so hard. And Larry came out and we walked down the hall and we went in and sat down. And the financial planner shoves me the paper and says, sign here. And my point to these lawyers was, how many times have you had couples sitting on the other side of your desk and you say, sign here, and you have no idea that signature, first of all that the crap that you had to do to get there, and then that signature represents a loss, a huge loss of something that was a responsibility of the two of you that now you have taken on. And I'm telling you, that really was an aha moment for those attorneys. Then the last thing I'll tell you, I'll share with you, was because I was a trainer and I did a lot of instructional training and models. I didn't realize it, but I created this emotional bank account in my heart. And I kept it in my heart because it was about heart. And in that bank account, there were heartbreakers and heart warmers. And the heartbreakers didn't know they were breaking my heart, but they were the people who would say, oh, let me know what you need. And then you'd never hear from them again. Right. Or they'd make stupid statements that just irritated you, or whatever. And then there were the heart warmers that just did it. They just showed up. They knew what to do. They knew what to say. There was a barber that was this big heart warmer, and he made deposits. And then there were people that I didn't need anymore that were the heartbreakers. And so what I did was I really tried to not bankrupt my emotional bank account. Mm-hmm. And I kept as many heart warmers close to me as I could. And I didn't even care about the heartbreakers. They could just go away. I didn't spend any energy with them. And, I have some really dear friends who have really taken that on, and they just said, I don't need them. I don't have the energy for them. And I'm not going to even, I'm not going to address this. So, that's a big aha moment for a lot of people too. That's so wonderful. Those are a few stories that I'll share with you.
Thank you. Final question. Are there any last words that you would like to leave for the viewers or listeners?
I've said a lot. I would say take take that phrase, take care of yourself, and turn it around to be kind to yourself, because you're the only person who will really be able to do that. And there's many ways that you can be kind to yourself, but be forgiving and be gracious. And maybe ask yourself those two questions. How do you want to live every day? And how do you want to feel in the end? Because the essence is you want to get to that last dance, whatever that looks like for you.
Absolutely. Well, Myrna Marofsky, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to just seeing you continue to make positive differences in the dementia community for families and their loved ones living with dementia. Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Myrna Marofsky for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.